Hello, lovers. Welcome to another episode of the Venus Embodiment series. Today we have Jonathan as our Venus in Aquarius astrologer. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hey Shahir, so excited to be here with you. Thanks for the
Oh,
invitation.
oh my God. Of course, of course. That's always nice. I've always appreciated your wisdom online and, in all our community spaces as well. Um, the
Oh,
purpose of
likewise.
The purpose of this Venus project is because I'm in a Venus year and I'm doing this collaborative project to witness the laughter loving Venus through the different signs and the life experiences of astrologers living with her. I'm actually going to be continuing beyond my Venus year, so it's kind of interesting and how this kind of just like brings things together. Um, in hopes that our exchanges of the experiential Venusian embodiments of who you are, the project would help anyone out there with like similar Venus signs.
Mm,
Um, my second round will actually focus on the house placement. So it's like, aspects and planetary rulership, etc., to feel seen and celebrated for their Venus too, and their loved
beautiful.
ones.
Yeah.
Um, I am Shahir. To those who don't know, I'm a love devotee. I'm a queer Muslim brown mystic who believes in love in everything, and um everything is love. I'm also a practicing astrologer, spirit guide connector, and a tarot reader. What about you, Jonathan? Introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Jonathan Coe. I am That's interesting. I feel like my identity is always shifting.
Ah,
You and I both
mutable.
have, I know, you and I both have Gemini moons, Shahir. I'm a Virgo
Yes.
rising. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
Pisces sun. And hmm, I think today I feel myself to just be a human trying to
Mm-hmm.
have a relationship with the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, recently I was actually thinking about my relationship with astrology, and I was thinking about why astrology really resonates with me and why astrology seems to make space for me too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is actually quite ancestral because I descended from a line of um, Chinese immigrants who
Mm-hmm.
settled in Indonesia, or mostly
Mm-hmm.
Chinese immigrants. And so my ancestors moved around a lot. And with
Mm.
that, there is a need to shift our customs, our religions, our language. And so in many ways, I think I come from a line of very lunar people. And
Mm.
so when I contextualize that and the constant migration with my fascination with the stars, with the skies, and with the planets, it really makes a lot of sense to me because
Mm.
these are, the firmament is always above us, right? And the firmament is
Yeah.
always with us. So, um, yeah, that's kind of where I feel myself to be today. I'm definitely a seeker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I lightly call myself an astrologer. I feel like I'm always learning from the stars. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I also practice Akashic consciousness, reading records,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to call it. I dabble in tarot as well, and yeah, I guess I'm a mystic. I'm an artist.
You are
Yeah.
everything. Oh my
Yes.
God. I love how you introduced that idea of like ancestral. I've been actually tapping into that even more now, actually.
I'd love to hear more if you mind
Yeah,
sharing.
yes, I think it was more so that's just like for me everything is ancestral in the sense of like
Mm,
because sometimes there are placement in our charts that we think that oh like I'd like not like okay, sometimes we have certain pursuits in life we want to do.
yeah.
However, we feel like nobody around us is doing it. However, it's actually very much like from the guidance of the stars, it's
Mm,
actually there is something ancestral about that process. And I
yeah.
think astrology is also an ancestral practice in the sense of that um it is about the reclamation of the stories of the ancestors, right?
Yeah.
I recently I was like doing some sort of like derivative houses, especially for me, it's just like becoming an astrologer, thinking of myself as a writer even more because I do love writing. From
Mm,
time to I love writing my feelings, and then but then I was like, oh, nobody in my family does that, or even my extended family.
yeah.
But then I was reminded of a story how my late grandmother, my one of my spirit ancestral guide used to write a lot in
Mm-hmm.
Jawi, which is not in like our usual alphabet. It's in Jawi, which is the Arabic form.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember there's always those documents of her writings, and my mom always talks about it. Um, and then I was also thinking about like the 10th house, which is the, in a Hellenist or traditional astrology, the 10th house is usually the mother. Um, but then the mother of the mother then becomes the seventh house because the 10th house from the 10th is actually the seventh, right? And I have Gemini
Yeah,
moon.
right.
I have Gemini moon in the seventh house. And then I was just like, piecing it all together sort of feeling. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I really love that exploration. That feels really
Yeah.
rich.
And then, okay, another connections I want to make with your literally before I jump into this call, I was
Mm,
actually looking at your Venus and I was reading Austin Coppock's decan because you are the first decan Venus, which,
hmm
you know, um, Venus is actually quite strong there in the sense of like this is the mark of an exile, the first decan of Aquarius, which is this is kind of just like you were talking about the story of like immigrants, and when I say exile, it's actually a form of intentional exile.
mm,
And so the fact
hmm
that you open up with that sense of story is very Venusian for me because it's like, let me just read a passage from the Venus in Aquarius delineation
Go for it.
from the first decan. It says
Yeah.
here, um, the obscure value of what is disregarded by others shines here, drawing these natives to go in search of ignored treasure. Those born with Venus in the face are drawn to those outside the mainstream of society, both the unappreciated geniuses and bizarre failures. Their aesthetics are usually eclectic, and there's often something chimerical. I think that's like something mythical about their creations. Many
Mm,
gladly sacrifice security for freedom, for in choice and experiment their for in choice and experiment they find beauty.
mm.
So
Shahir, I feel tears welling up in my eyes. I'm
literally,
like, okay, yes, I feel
yeah,
seen.
because that is very much that Decan is this is the face of exclusion and intentional exile. And I
Mhm,
love that saying of intentional exile because sometimes when we think about exile, we think about someone who doesn't have a choice, which is also true, right? Sometimes we choose to go somewhere or to choose a path just because we don't feel belong in the
mhm,
whatever path we were before, or maybe we just feel like, oh, this is enough, kind of feeling. And the idea of like the valuation of freedom um is very important, is important there. So
I love that. I love that so much. And also, I do
yeah.
want to say too that I am also an immigrant.
Yeah.
My family is not in the United States right now, and I moved here when I was 17 to study music, but I've basically stayed here. And
Mm-hmm.
I recently got my permanent residency, which is, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's always so weird, right? Because what are borders anyway? But
Yeah.
that was a process that took a very long time. And it was actually very much a Venusian process because,
Oh my
like you,
God.
Shahir, yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
also in my Venus profected year. And
Mm-hmm.
literally, I received my green card when Venus was on Jupiter, but I didn't know about it because this was just the announcement. And then I literally heard news about it when Venus was, no, actually, I got it reversed. So Venus was on my series when I got it, and then Venus
Mm-hmm.
was on my Jupiter when I heard about it.
Oh wow.
Jupiter in the
That
11th house.
Oh wow, that is beautiful.
That's
That
like
is
astrologer good, right?
that is very astrologer good moment. Okay, how I love that we just like jump ahead and
I know.
I know it's just like let's get into it. Because there's something very resonant about you're saying about the immigrant story and the exile and the moon also, right? The moon is also another marker of ancestral sort of like exile, sort of like
hmm
traveler, like the moon. That's why the moon just goes around and around because it is a traveling planet in a way that just trying to find its home in all this different zodiac. Okay.
100%.
Um, my first question for all astrologers for this series is always, as a being, as you are, what and who is Venus to you today?
Okay, so I knew you were going to ask this question, Shahir. So I I prepared because I'm a good
The,
student. I'm a
the
Virgo
Virgo, the
rising.
Virgo rising. I love that.
Uh, and when I sat down and
Mhm.
when I really felt into it, what came through was actually an invocation that I wrote when I was preparing for the transmissions um, that I shared in the container, in the astrology learning container that I'm currently
Mhm.
facilitating with my collaborator, friend, my teacher, Britton LaRue.
Britain, oh, Britain is amazing.
Yeah,
You both
I
are
love
such.
Britton.
I love how you both collaborate. It's so great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I think, the whole thing about collaboration is also very much Venus and Aquarius, and we can talk about that
Mhm.
later. But what came through for me was this invocation. So do you mind if I just share this invocation
No,
for
go
Venus?
ahead. Yes,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure our this will be. Oh my God, that this is so juicy. Yes, I'm all for that.
Yay. Okay. So here's my Venus invocation. Mother of mysteries, sea-born god of endless nights, keeper of pleasure, seeker of ecstasy. Open our eyes to easeful paths, relish our beings with songs and libations, awaken our senses to the beauty in all things, guide us to seek wisdom in laughter, dissolve our inhibitions till we're merry with delight, fill our skin and flesh with resonance, meet with us at the edge of desire.
Oh my God, that is so beautiful. I love it. Wow. I love the one on the inhibition. And it's like that felt
Mm-hmm.
very resonant for me right now. Oh wow. Oh wow. I love that for more too because it's like my own personal transit. I have
Mm-hmm.
like because I have Aquarius fifth house, which
Mm-hmm.
is basically the house of divination and rituals and all those things. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you're my guest and you are starting your definition with an invocation, that is just very beautiful.
Yeah.
And do you
Yeah.
use that for your own like personal relating with Venus usually?
I do. I do. And I have my own personal thing with Venus as well that
Okay.
I don't publicly share, but this one feels really resonant to just kind of share with everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that you were talking about inhibitions
Mhm.
because something that I've been kind of thinking a lot about with regards to Venus is this idea of ecstasy.
Ecstasy, yeah.
Um, yeah, and when of course, because I have my Venus in Aquarius, I fell down the rabbit hole of like searching for etymologies.
Mm-hmm.
And the etymology of ecstasy is ekstasis in Greek, which
Mm-hmm.
means entrancement, astonishment, insanity, and also any displacement or removal from the proper place, which I really love. And then also, the word ex, right, means without. And
Mm.
sta, actually in the Proto-Indo-European, is basically translates to set down or to make or to be firm, right? So I think there's something about seeking ecstasy that's about going towards experience where one loses one's firm footing, right? Where one loses one's standing. And I think that's very much related to what you were saying earlier about exile and intentional
Mm-hmm.
exile. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
something about Venus that is about the pursuit of that which enraptures us, the pursuit of that which is maybe doesn't necessarily have utility or doesn't have quote unquote a use, but
Mm-hmm.
without which life is meaningless. So,
Um,
yeah, that's kind of something that I've been thinking a lot about. And I can go further, but I'm kind of curious to hear what your
y-
thoughts are about that.
no, I think that is very resonant and
Mm,
telling. And yeah, because for me, Venus is all it is about that sense of like that reaching out, that attracting too, but then it's like this process of like, yeah, it's almost like you disembody to be embodied, you know? It's like
yeah, exactly.
it's like you go
Exactly.
out to go in, you know? That's like you exile from yourself in a way. Um, but then in order for you to kind of like nourish or even attract this different sense of self or it's not maybe different, it's actually just a different parts of the inner selves that is just um longing to be acknowledged in a way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And I love that
Yeah.
you were bringing the body to Shahir,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
this is something I've been thinking a lot about, right? Venus rules Taurus and Libra, and
Mm-hmm.
we know that the moon is exalted in Taurus and
Mm-hmm.
Saturn is exalted in Libra, right?
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking about this kind of love triangle between Venus, Saturn, and the moon. And it's
I
interesting that
love.
Saturn and
Uh-huh.
the moon, right, are kind of like they're time markers. I
Mm-hmm.
think of the moon as having a short leash on time and
Mm-hmm.
Saturn as having a long leash on time. And so it's interesting to think about pleasure and all the things, child making, child rearing, inspiration, birthing, procreation, all the things that are within the Venus domain, are associated with meanings or sensations of pleasure and pain
Mm-hmm.
because it's confined within uh, incarnate form, right? The
Mm-hmm.
limitation, the restrictions of form,
Mm-hmm.
which is represented or associated with the moon and Saturn. So I've
Yeah.
been thinking a lot about the corporeality of Venus, kind of
Mm-hmm.
this idea that the Venusian is only really the Venusian when it's kind of embodied, that Venus
Yes.
seeks embodiment, Venus seeks form. Hmm.
Oh my God, I love that. I literally was just writing about relationship between Saturn and the moon. And obviously, yes, I agree that like, the moon rules like the shorter, the quickness of time and very swift
Hmm.
moving around. But the Saturn is more about like the permanence part of it, right? It's like, how can I make this change permanent or solidify it or even like break it down altogether, right? Sometimes Saturn also really does that in the sense of like a block of just like, nope, not that way,
Hmm.
um
Hmm.
and so that feels very true for from what you're saying. And yeah, I love that. Yeah, I feel that Venus is so generous as a planet. The fact that, I think that it is the only sign that has like, both of Venus home exalt something. So
Hmm.
so I do feel like there is a sense of and that's and I mean obviously Venus's exaltation is Pisces, which is also another thing. But like yeah, I feel there's also something there about like Venus having a home where she, they, whatever, they very much unapologetically is about like putting one of it is time, also like Saturn and the moon, which is about
Yeah.
the relationship, our relationship to time,
Hmm.
hence our relationship to corporeality, mortality as well. And that in turn it becomes about our embodiment. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love that.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna share your chart out here,
Sure.
just so that people who are curious, because I know that you already introduced us that you are a Virgo rising, so that would make your Venus in the sixth house freshly. In a different system, it technically is in the fifth, is it?
Hmm. Yeah. In
Okay.
Porphyry and Placidus, I think it's in the
Okay,
fifth.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I was like, yeah, looking at the degrees, I don't even need to just like see. I was like, yeah, this is a Venus also in the fifth, um, and so it is also co-present or even I would say conjunct with the North Node.
Hmm.
Kind of just like, how does that feel? Now I'm curious about like how does a Venus
Mm.
and North Node interaction for you happens in your life right now, or how have you processed that, or if you don't.
Yeah. That's a great question, Shahir. I will say I'm going to contextualize this in the recent Saturn in Aquarius transit because Saturn
Mm-hmm.
has been both kind of going over my Venus and my North Node. And
Mm-hmm.
um, the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius actually happened on my Venus. So
Yes.
that's also been really interesting because I think I will say that out of all the placements in my chart, Venus was the last one that I kind of felt like I had conscious access to.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else was pretty, my sun, I've always really resonated with. I always knew I was a Virgo rising, even though I really hated it.
Mm-hmm.
My moon in Gemini makes so much sense when I learned about it. But I think Venus really came much later because to me,
Mm-hmm.
Venus in Aquarius has a little bit of a detachment and it has a little bit of like a coldness, maybe even in terms of temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So when Saturn was going over my North Node and my Venus, I think what that does is that Venus suddenly became very literal for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I was just telling you that, recently I had I've been having my Venus perfected year since March last year. And when Venus was literally on my ninth house, one of our mentors, Sabrina, went to New York and I met her, and a few other
Uh-huh.
mentors that I've only been kind of cultivating relationships with online. But, suddenly I was aware that, oh, Venus can actually be so real, and
Mm-hmm.
then, um, like I mentioned, when Venus was on my 10th house, like about to leave, I got my permanent residency. And then I literally heard news about it when Venus was on Jupiter
Oh
in
wow.
the 11th house, right?
Yeah,
And then when Venus was in Aquarius, I went home for the first time. And
I
that Sagittarius,
see.
or sorry, Venus was in Sagittarius,
Sagittarius,
and
which is
Sagittarius
in
rules
your
my
fourth
fourth
house.
house.
Yeah. Oh
Correct.
wow.
Correct.
Oh
So
wow.
in some sense, I don't know if I have an answer for you that's super
Mm-hmm.
concrete,
Mm-hmm.
but I think in some sense how I felt Venus in my lived experience is that Venus has always been, that force that is definitely benevolent,
Mm-hmm.
that is definitely always providing really interesting solutions. But also, my experience with Venus through most of my life is that Venus has just been kind of quiet, and
Mm.
is the one that's detached and the one that's kind of maybe giving blessings more in
Mm-hmm.
disguise. So in that
Mm.
sense, I think on a felt experience, that's also been, um I've kind of contextualized that as Venus being the lesser benefic, in
Mm-hmm.
traditional astrology, in
Mm-hmm.
that Venus has been a little bit more quiet, a little bit more detached, a little, more like, um behind the scenes in terms of
Mm.
the blessings that Venus have been giving me.
Yeah.
In terms of the conjunction with the North Node, I feel that, I feel that more in the Aquarius side of it. I think when I give myself permission to, um seek that which is really pleasurable for me, which again, the Austin Coppock quote that you were just, reciting was really
Yeah.
resonant for me because that was very true. I think I was
Mm-hmm.
always seeking like the irregular, I was
Mm-hmm.
always seeking beauty in maybe what others just kind of pass by. And, also, I think in turning my search, which often very much feels intellectual because
Mm-hmm.
of my Gemini moon, and Venus is also in Aquarius, when I let myself learn the things, seek the things that I'm really, truly resonating on a deep level with, that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps is considered weird by society, I've always found that to be a very fruitful exploration. Like, for example, astrology. I
Mm-hmm.
really came into astrology and started studying astrology seriously, after a series of, um, essentially heartbreaks of having pursued
Mm-hmm.
things that I thought that I really resonated with, that I thought would kind of, bring me a sense of like being known by people or being understood
Mm-hmm.
by people. And then at some point, I just gave up because it didn't do any of those things. And I
Mm-hmm.
think in pursuing things like astrology, things that I'm truly, truly interested in, and that I have this unquenchable desire for, that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps other people may consider weird, I found
Mm-hmm.
that, my community started constellating around me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That is so beautiful and very Aquarian in terms of um it's almost like the soul searching of the Venus almost, right? And using the
Yeah.
star. I mean, now I'm thinking about like, yeah, Aquarius in the tarot system is literally the star card, right? And how do you achieve the star card? You need the fucking tower moment first, right? That is
I love that.
it's just like I mean, I mean the star is one of my life path, one of my major tarot trumps. And so I love it. I love
Are
what
you
you're
also
saying.
strength card?
Yeah, star slash
Oh my
strength.
gosh, we're both
Yeah,
strength.
yeah, we're both
I'm
star
also
slash.
strength.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, another yet another resonant configuration. But yeah, like the moments where you're talking about like heartbreak, and I think um the star card for me is always that sense of a cosmic reset of like
Mhm.
mm, the freshness.
Yeah.
It's like while you're saying the irregular, you know, it is the irregular, but it's also there's something very fresh about it, right? There's something
Mhm.
very much um newness of hope that is being offered through this exploration. And then, in a very typical air sign story, um, the star is obviously about astrology, and we're talking about astrology right now. Um, it's kind of like, I think I do feel like we were talking about Venus as an embodiment earlier, and I do feel like every Venus do have to have that sense of like knowledge or whatever, like mental
Mm,
sort of stimulation, right? You're also a Gemini moon, right? So in a way, not saying that like, you know, you're using knowledge to actually be human, in a way. It's just like I do feel like a lot of Venus in air sign, even Libra is also, but it's a domicile of Venus, so it's like there is a sense of like relating with another so that I know
yeah.
who I am. It's like I need to
Hmm.
connect myself to this larger systems and larger sort of like thinking or ideologies, whatever you want to code it, for me to kind of just like know my space and place as well,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally. I love that. And I think, something I will say about the expression of Venus in Aquarius within me.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, Colin Bedell talked about this on Instagram, and I really loved what he was saying because he was talking about Venus in Aquarius as, infusing more levity and more friendship into a romantic relationship
Mm-hmm.
and breathing more romance into friendship. And this really
Mm-hmm.
resonates deeply for me. Um, and also, the other thing I will say about Venus in Aquarius in how I experience it is, and this I think kind of came from my one-on-one work with
Mm-hmm.
the brilliant astrologer Erin Shipley.
Oh
Shout
my
out to
God.
Erin.
I love
I love
Erin.
Erin.
Yeah.
Um, which is that I think Venus in Aquarius has a little bit of a detachment,
Mm-hmm.
brilliance, and also exceptionalism. So what I found, and this I've also noticed in a lot of Venus and Aquarius people who come to me, whether they are my student or they're my client, where Venus in Aquarius is forever balancing the tension between being the person who's really truly exceptional and who
Mm-hmm.
is able to do a lot of things and is very, very capable and very sharp in their observations
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to be just one of the bros.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think this
No.
tension of like wanting to belong and wanting to fit in and also wanting to um kind of, not draw attention in the crowd, but
Mm-hmm.
also knowing that you have something to say. And when you do go up on stage, you have the potential to make an impact. You have a
Mm-hmm.
potential to shift people's perspectives is
Mm-hmm.
always really difficult to navigate. And also, I think
Mm-hmm.
the other word that comes up for me with Venus in Aquarius is standards. Because I think a lot of
Mm.
Venus in Aquarius natives have standards, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been
Yeah, I
thinking
know.
about Aquarius.
Aquarius is the most stubborn side. I'm just kidding, but
Yes,
yes.
and I think Aquarius is rightfully rather snobby,
Mm-hmm.
and I think part of embodying the Aquarius consciousness, the Aquarius quality is in embracing that I'm not for everyone and everyone's not for me.
Yeah, no, that is truly Aquarian.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of things I want to talk about and reflect there.
Mhm, mhm.
Especially with Venus and Aquarius. Such a traditional astrology geek. Going back to the domicile ruler, Saturn.
Yeah.
Saturn rules the fringe, right? Um, and I forgot I'm quoting whoever here, but like some ancient people, but like, Saturn is always about the fringe. It is the outermost planet in the in the traditional system, like the outermost planet in the sense of like the ones that we could see. Although technically we could see Uranus apparently, right, on certain
Mhm,
configuration, but then based on those times, they only see Saturn as the furthest one, which
mhm.
Saturn rules the fringe, right? Um, which is definitely about the Aquarian side, which is also Aquarian is also how is that different from Capricorn? Is that Aquarian is also the diurnal side. So meaning that is the
Yeah.
diurnal domicile, meaning that Saturn is a more diurnal, it is more associated to the diurnal sect. Hence, I was just thinking of like, yeah, it is about like one of the bros you were saying and kind of just like feeling like you are off the people and not just off the people, but off the people that have not had their voice heard in a way. That is in
Mhm,
contrast. Like for me, Aquarian has this energy of like decentralization, obviously.
mhm. Mhm.
If Leo is about the shine from within to go outside, I
Mhm.
do feel like it's like, but Venus in Aquarius is from the outside shining their own light, you know? So it's
Mm.
literally the star in a way, right? So if we're
Yeah.
on Earth, we look at the stars up there, all the fixed stars, for example, like Fomalhaut or Regulus, whatever. Venus in Aquarius is like the star itself. It's like
Mm.
it's like the shine of that star itself from very far. It doesn't mean that they don't have anything to say, right? Because sometimes um we are still in this kind of just like solar system, meaning that we're still confined by this, but then there's like fucking galaxies out there that we don't know about, right? And alien superstar, whatever. And so that's what I always feel with Venus and Aquarius, where they they just shine their light and they just um yeah, even for me, like working with fixed stars, like I do love working with certain fixed stars, feels very Venus in Aquarian or feels very Aquarian in nature, because I was like, oh yeah, those fixed stars are also like those stars are also just shining their own light, you know?
Mm. Mhm.
And I do feel like Aquarian in general has that sort of power. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I really resonate with that. And I think also, that connection with the distant star, right, that I
Hmm.
think Aquarius can have, sometimes means that, for the Venus in Aquarius or whatever placement you have in Aquarius, that sign or rather that planet or that force or that part
Hmm.
within you always knows that there's a better way to do this, right? There's always a
Mm.
better way to kind of achieve something. And
Hmm.
it's challenging because, we do live in society and there is a certain way of what is the word I'm looking for? I'm looking for basically, I think there's a certain consensus, right?
Hmm.
Reality that we all kind of subconsciously agree to. And in
Yeah,
order
like a
to
social contract or something like that.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And I think in order to kind of get your point across and be able to affect that change, sometimes you have to fuck shit up a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
that's uncomfortable. And that,
Yeah.
requires a certain level of like nervous system regulation to be able to
Mm-hmm.
go in there and say the thing that like penetrates through the bullshit and then sit in the discomfort of like how other people are kind of rattled by that, right? Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I love that. Oh wow, I love that. Um, what does it bring out for me from whatever you're saying about Venus in Aquarius? Again, another thing is just like Venus in Aquarius. Yeah, like saying the thing that will kind of just like the nervous system, which is very Aquarian, right? It's like um that say the bullshit or like yeah, it is a rebellious sort of Venus too. It's like
Mhm.
because again, you're coming from the fringe, you're not coming from the center. Hence, there's always something that you say that's actually about a lived experience of no one else could perhaps even relate to,
Mhm.
but when I say no one else could relate to in the sense of like it is very unique in the sense. Um, however, no one is also people also know that it's also part of the truth in a way, right? It's like
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. It's like yeah, that's your like that's your experience, and hence it might feel a bit weird, like that sounds so weird to me, but like no, but that's yours, that's like that's your
Mhm.
story, almost to
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, Shahir. And what you're saying is reminding me of what one of my teachers, Leah
Mhm.
Garza, was talking about, which is the idea of murmuration. And
Mhm.
essentially, if you look at like a flock of birds, right? Like a flock of birds know where to fly to, right? In order to like
Mm.
escape the winter. You
Mhm.
can also think about this as, in like if you watch soccer, right?
Mhm.
A lot of soccer fans like to do like the wave thing,
Oh
you know?
yes,
And
yes. Oh,
humans
like when they
know,
open from
yeah,
the seat.
exactly. Humans also have this really innate way of tapping into that greater web of relationality and of
Mm.
intelligence, right? And so I think the thing about the Venus in Aquarius, or also maybe this is a little bit, connected to my North Node in Aquarius, is
Mhm.
that the Aquarian part of us is aware of a certain possible truth. And
Mm.
I think that sometimes the perception of that truth and the perception of that possibility for the Venus in Aquarius can
Mhm.
feel extremely like we can be very convinced that this is
Mm-hmm.
the truth, you know?
Yeah.
And I think what's important for me to learn over my life is that
Mm-hmm.
just because I am so convinced and in my perception is very clear that this is the truth,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean this is the objective truth or the capital T
Yes.
truth,
Yeah.
but that in the energy of my conviction, I have the power to shift other people. And the thing
Yes.
that's scary, Shahir, about shifting is that you don't know, right? When you shift something, you don't know how it's going to impact the collective
Mm-hmm.
because it might, tilt it this way or it might tilt it the other way, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that the power that you have is in simply creating the shift, right?
Mm.
I'm thinking about, connected to what you were saying earlier about maybe the fringe is the myth of Prometheus, right? And I think there's
Mm.
something in the myth of Prometheus that is about a redistribution of resource, a redistribution of elemental force, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is rooted in a sense of wanting to um, shake things up, wanting to change the collection concentration of
Mm-hmm.
relational power, right? Mhm.
Mm. Oh my God, I love that. Oh wow. Yeah, yeah. That sense of yes, that's like you don't know which balance are you tipping or like, it
Mhm.
is about like putting it out there and shifting the narratives almost and whatever like the sort of like things that have been said or things that are just out there. Um, that felt very true for Venus and Aquarians, and I think that's so Aquarian energy. And I think it's also like that also brings up for me a question of experimentation. So it's also like,
Mhm.
it is very an experimental sort of way. And it's not just like ha 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 ha, like I'm just having fun with it. I mean, that's also part of the Venus and Aquarius. Like it's like, oh, I'm just like trying to be different, whatever. Um, and it's so funny because I was just like literally tweeting yesterday. I'm also in the Venus year, right? Because I felt like I was just like, the reason why I'm doing this YouTube series is also because I'm in a Venus year. Actually, in my solar return, I have Venus in Aquarius. I have heavy Aquarius energy in my solar return. It's literally because I have that like Mars, I have that Saturn, I have that. I'm also a moon in Aquarius in my solar return.
Whoa.
So
Okay.
um, and so yeah, and I was just tweeting yesterday that I told that I was like, I want my YouTube astrology presence to be something different than whatever everyone
Mhm.
else is doing out there.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I feel that I have been doing something different with this sort of series too. Um, yeah, so that's very much 100% relatable.
I
and I,
love that.
and
I
I don't
love
know,
that.
I don't know where it would lead. Like honestly, and again, I was like coming to the point of experimentation. I was like, yeah, this is just something I want to do and I want to say, and I just like I'm curious about astrologer themselves. How do they feel and embody and relate to their own
Mhm.
Venus sign? Um,
Mhm.
maybe it's also because I have like a very combust Venus or Venusian things. It's always like a very much an internal things in progress for me.
Mhm.
Um, and like I do feel like I would say I'm detached from Venus. I actually am Venusian in a way, but it's just like I have a very Solarian way of like doing my Venus, you know. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, that feels resonant. If you want to add
Mhm.
or if you want to shift the topic or whatever.
Yeah, I think
Mhm.
what you're opening up for me here is kind of going back to how Venus in Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, right?
Mhm.
So that connection between Aquarius and Saturn, I think what's interesting about Aquarius is that Aquarius is so often, or at least in certain development
Mhm.
of its manifestation, um so often guided by a sense of like this is what I don't want, this is what I don't want, in
Yes.
a sense that is very interesting because I think um I've been thinking a lot about Aquarius as the sign that's between Capricorn and Pisces. And
Mhm.
I think Capricorn has a lot to do with that structure, with kind of climbing the mountain at all costs, and then Pisces has to do with like what mountain? We have dissolved all possible topologies, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, and so like Aquarius, I think, is somewhere in between where it's becoming aware of the ways that, the binary we've created, the structures that we've created is kind of all an illusion,
Mm-hmm.
and yet still being very much in, or still very much attached to the feeling, the experience of the binary, right? The
Mm.
structure. So I
Mm-hmm.
think Aquarius has to contend with this energy of, I know that the rules are bullshit, but we're still somewhat tethered, right, to some kind of law before we can truly get to a point where we just stop giving a fuck when we're in
No.
Pisces.
Oh my God. Truly. Truly. I was just talking to um someone, another dear friend, Nikki, Venus in Aquarius as well. I'm actually gonna have Nikki them for the second round of this series.
Nice.
I'm slightly changing the format again. It's like such a Aquarian for me. It's like very Aries too. I'm just like been there, done that, but like my second round has to be. I'm changing the concept a bit. All right. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what that brings up for me, yes, actually, that's so true. Like Aquarian always has this sense of like, okay, I know this law. Um, that is I know the inherent problems in it as well. And there is almost a like that very Saturnian, right? So Saturn is still a planet that is able to judge and to critique. Like, I do
Mm-hmm.
feel like people with Aquarian placement, they're actually very good critiques, right? They're like, they might not be the best implementer. Sometimes they're like, okay, you do it, but like they can't do it, but like they know what to say to improve it.
Totally.
You know why? Because like because I have lots of experience in school, and I remember because I have such an Aquarius third house. I remember I was just like very much excelling in this one class because
Mm.
one of the job was just to critique papers, and I was such a great critique. I would
Such a
like
good point. Yeah.
and so I do feel that's also very Aquarian in a way that so they know the bullshit of just like, oh yeah, there's something wrong here, blah blah blah. They're able, but like it's not to say that they have the solution necessarily, but
Mm-hmm.
then they have that awareness again,
Mm-hmm.
that sense of like awareness of this code that you are subscribing to, and
Yeah.
then as you were saying about like fuck that shit, right? It is um for me um that a sense of Venus is what I value, right? It's like, is this the kind of system that I value? So, for example, I'm a mystic, right? I'm such a multi-practitioner person, but then there are moments where I went like fuck this, like magic doesn't work. Like when I not to
Mm.
say that magic doesn't work in the sense of like I don't want to be subscribing to this that I have to be do it this way in order for
Yeah.
me to connect with whatever, right? For example, people say that okay, you do your Venus relation during Venus hour, during Venus day. And I'm like, yes, I know, but like I can connect with Venus every day. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to wait for Venus hour. I don't need necessarily to like, it's like why am I needing, like, obviously there are, I mean, I'm not trying to say that like all those like whatever magical occult knowledge, all the hidden knowledge, I'm very aware of it, right? It's like, of course, if you want all the outcomes, blah blah blah, you have to make it perfect. Like you have to like attune yourself to those energies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, no, but like if I'm starting to subscribe to that, I'm also very much limited to that experience. And
Mm.
I don't want
Oh,
that, because
yeah.
I don't want that sort of like process, hence outcome, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that what if I change my process so that I can change the outcome, you know? So
Yes.
I don't know where I'm
Wow.
going with that.
I love that. I love that so much, Shahir. I really see the potency of your third house Aquarius there. You do have Aquarius in your third house, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
Saturn too.
yeah. Nice, nice. Um, yeah, I feel like, third house to me does relate a lot to ritual, and something I will respond to from what you were saying is,
Mm,
to me, this is speaking to how I've been. I don't know, this is still maybe something that I'm mulling over, something that I'm
mhm.
still kind of workshopping, but to me, magic is there's a lot of parallel between magic and music, actually. And in a
Mm.
sense, music is magic, right? Because it's
Oh
like,
my God.
where did it come from? What is this, right? And it comes and then it just goes. But I think, when I think about magic with capital M or music with capital M, it's like, yes, you can make infinite, there are infinite ways of making music, right? There are
Mm-hmm.
infinite types of music that you can listen to. But when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to like us, in this particular embodiment, there's a way that you need to figure out how to personalize it. Because if you are Shania Twain and you have that country twang, you probably shouldn't be singing opera, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a heavy metal rocker who's screaming at the top of your lungs, you should probably not be singing ballads, right? And I think that awareness of like, yes, we are all connected. Magic is, capital M magic is always available,
Mm-hmm.
but what kind of magic are you here to do, right? What
Mm.
kind of magic are you here to channel? What kind of magic are you here to receive is very much specific to your device, your hardware,
Mm.
right? And I think an awareness and an acknowledgement and taking up the task to really, you know, be in devotion to studying
Mm-hmm.
the specificity of your hardware, like
Yeah.
learning the manual is to me very Saturnian, right? And I think
Mm.
one thing that's interesting about Aquarius, the Aquarius energy, and how I've been working with it in my life is that I think Aquarius being kind of again this one can think about Aquarius as the bridge between Capricorn and Pisces is
Yeah.
about simultaneously liberating oneself from the shoulds, but also liberating oneself from the idea that one needs to, you know, authenticity comes from not reading the manual. That is not true, right?
Mm.
That sometimes like reading the manual and knowing what the rules are can help you understand the logic behind the rules, and then you
Yes.
know how to effectively break the rules, right? So
Yes.
I think the Aquarius is always doing, in order to kind of access the genius of the Aquarian consciousness, one
Mm-hmm.
needs to do both simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm.
One needs to get rid of this idea that like, you need to be original all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That unless it's original, it's not, valid, right? But
Mm-hmm.
also at the same time, kind of not shun tradition, because I think there's just kind of
Yes.
something in tradition that um that is that is great, that maybe is
Mm-hmm.
is there for you. Mhm.
Yeah, no, it makes whatever you're saying too. I love saying that Aquarius as a bridge. And it just also in this dichotomy, or even maybe it's not even a duality, whatever. It makes me think about the Aquarius glyph itself. It's just like the
Mm.
two parallels, like waves of water. I mean, it's like a
Yeah.
wavelength almost, or like a wave of music or whatever. Um, that feels very much like, yeah, Aquarian has always this sense of like the in-betweenness of like
Mhm.
yeah, knowing the rules so that you are able to break it is very
Mhm.
Aquarian. It's like I
Yeah.
need to know the manual so
Yeah.
that I can know how do I make it my own, make it personalized, make it like blah 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 blah. And
Mm.
so yeah, and then from that action is actually it is a form of invention, and that's how invention is, right? It's like how do you invent something new? You actually have to study the old in
Mhm.
order for you to invent something new. I mean, for me, it's like nothing is original anyway.
Yeah.
There it's like, oh,
It's true.
really? Like you think you're so original? Let me let me say what is this a derivative of?
Yes, exactly.
However, but that to each of his own. I mean, Leo people will be so mad about it, but for me, we can talk about the axis a bit later. But yeah, I do feel that Aquarian sort of consciousness. Um, I kind of just like want to talk to you a bit more because I love how this conversation has been very much about like the Aquarian energy, and I want to like pivot it to you. Like I love
Mhm.
how you're such a Venus and Aquarius that we're talking it in such a like in a very universalized sort of way of relating.
Uh-huh.
About you and your process with music, if you're talking about
Mm.
magic and music.
Mm.
I know you personally as like because I've seen um you are a musician, you are an artist all along. And I was just like, yeah, you have this um Venus in the sixth, right? However, Saturn is also very loud for you. And Saturn Capricorn, very oh my god, you are actually like a like you're like mercurial, you're like Jovian and also very Saturnian.
Yes.
So how does that feel? Like
Totally.
there's this for me sometimes when I look at houses that are just being blended into a
Mhm,
rulership, especially
mhm.
with such a domicile ruler, it feels like, those energies will inherently be blended anyway, right?
Mhm.
It's like your sixth house and your creativity and the work that you do. Um, so yeah, I'm curious more about like how do you approach
Yeah.
that, or maybe even your upbringing, etc.
Yeah. So something that I was kind of thinking about before we started, right,
Mm-hmm.
was really thinking about the different aspects that my Venus is making
Mm-hmm.
and the non-aspects as well, right? So I think
Yes.
it's kind of interesting to think about Venus being co-present with North Node for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a very wide trine to my moon in Gemini, and
Mm-hmm.
it is conjunct with Mars, but like you said, it's in a different sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's something about um feeling a little bit outside, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
exiled, a little bit um yeah, not understood. I think
Mm-hmm.
this was a huge part of my experience growing up. I think when I think about my upbringing and my childhood, a lot of it felt like I was kind of on the outside looking in.
Mm-hmm.
And with the fact that my chart ruler or my ascendant ruler is Mercury, and Mercury is in Pisces, is in detriment,
Mm-hmm.
it's in fall. I think I've always been blessed and cursed with a really potent ability to just kind of go into incognito mode. I was able to kind of
Yeah.
blend in some ways with my environment,
Mm-hmm.
and not just blending in, right? Because part of the Virgo rising, I think, is also, let me show you how much better I can do this compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
So I feel like not only was I blending in, but I was also going really far in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But internally, there was always this sense of like, this is not really how I am. This is not really who I am. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for a long time, there was a lot of it felt like before I really had the requisite kind of nervous system capacity to withstand, really being different with people in a
Mm-hmm.
way that still connects me to them.
Mm-hmm.
It always felt like it was always me against the world. Like I grew
Yeah.
up with a sense of, I don't know, like, so a huge part of my growing up experience is for a long time not really having friends in school,
Mm-hmm.
and then also experiencing some level of bullying. It wasn't like that bad, but as a sensitive kid, it was very painful and very
Mm-hmm.
kind of very alienating. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, also not always feeling fully seen or fully attuned to at home, but
Mm-hmm.
also not knowing exactly how to take space. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that experience of kind of feeling a little stuck was always
Mm-hmm.
part of my experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of change with as I get older, learning more about myself, knowing more about who I am and what I value, starting to really take my seat at the table,
Yeah.
and knowing that I don't, taking your seat at the table doesn't require permission. You just
Mm-hmm.
have to sit there.
Yeah, though, that's true.
You just have
Yeah.
to sit there and you just have to say, like, I'm here. I belong. I
Mm-hmm.
may not do the things that you do. I may not agree with the things that you agree with.
Mm-hmm.
I may not, um, you know, I may not do things exactly in the way that you approve of things being done, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
just gonna do it. And I'm not gonna
Yeah.
make a big fuss out of it. And I think this part around like not making a big fuss out of it has been a huge thing for me on a
Mm-hmm.
personal level, because the Aquarian um way of being, right? The Aquarian consciousness can have so much reaction towards what it's not, right? Or what it
Mm-hmm.
perceives to be not the right thing or not the ideal thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the revolution happens when the Aquarian is able to say, okay, that's there, but I'm just not going to put my attention there. I'm not
Yeah.
going to let what I am not define me. And I'm going to
Mm.
start doing the truly hard work the truly Saturnian work of figuring out what I actually am.
Yeah, no, I love that. Oh my God, that seems very loud and true. Um, as a person who's going through their Saturn return, it's going to perfect
Hmm.
in February. I mean the exact. Um, yeah, it's like it's like, yeah, it's like really that shift, right? You know, Aquarius, Saturn is the principle of the no, right? This is my no. This is not me. That is not
Hmm.
me. That is not me. And then yeah, and I love how you're processing it. It's like, but then how does that process of negation actually helps
Hmm.
you find that answer for yourself
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
in a very unapologetic way, which is so true because sometimes we can be very obsessed with especially especially if like those are the ways that are also gaining tractions. It's such a
Hmm.
Leo slash Aquarius struggle, right? It's like I
Totally.
was like, oh my God, I should be making my videos like this because those are the ones getting the views, right? People are curious
Hmm.
about that, just like, those are, but at the same time think about it of like, okay, yeah, but like that's not me. That's not who I am.
Hmm.
That's not my embodiment. Hence,
Hmm.
I need to take my seat of power, as you were saying, very beautifully,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
create from that sense of like your own knowing.
Totally. And I think, to kind of answer your original question about music, because my
Mhm.
Mercury in Pisces can never answer in a straight line, you can probably relate to.
Yeah, no.
I feel like for a long time I really used music to both demarcate myself, meaning like to make myself exceptional,
Mm-hmm.
and also to protect myself, because somewhere
Mm.
along the way I learned that um if I hone my skills and I am able to be up on that stage, sharing
Mm-hmm.
music in a way that's not only skillful but pleasurable to people, then it
Mm-hmm.
actually protects me from A, having to do the messy work of actually relating to people, and also B, it protects me from people who may want to bully me or who may want to say bad
Mm.
things about me. Because when you are up on that stage and when you are known by everybody, it's harder for people to actively be your enemy because you are visible. So I
Mm.
think when I think about that Mars Venus conjunction, I think there's something about um Mars wanting to kind of accomplish certain goals, right? In
Mm-hmm.
Capricorn, Mars wanting to, um, Mars having the ability to execute something really well,
Mm-hmm.
and then Venus wanting to shine like a star,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
Venus wanting to be a little different, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that Venus in Aquarius finds a lot of safety in kind of staying apart. And a
Mm.
lot of my adult life has been around navigating what it means to be part of something, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's part of a lineage or even, musically, like, you know, I'm continuing to be drawn to what you were saying earlier, that nothing is original, because it's
Mm-hmm.
very true, especially when you're working on something like music. People have written all kinds of music out there, and so you can't really fully be original, but I think there's a way in which you can navigate how to contribute your voice to the choir
Mm-hmm.
of the music that's already written and
Mm-hmm.
express yourself, but not feel like you have to be detached, or um, you have to totally stray away from the tradition in order
Mm-hmm.
to be authentic to yourself. Mhm.
Yes, yes, no, that's very fair and that's very true. Um, no, I believe in that for sure. Because yeah, because I struggle with that a lot because I struggle with that in the sense of like very cerebrally, like very third housey, as well. It's like you don't like sometimes that's also like the Aquarian curse. I feel like for me
Mm,
whenever like I mean I'm basing my experience because I'm freshly out of school, right? I'm such a person who wants to be always like original whenever I'm writing my papers. I'm like, you know, and that's a turn too. It's like, why are you choosing the hard thing? Like,
mm,
it's like, why are you choosing something that is almost like impossible to do? Like, I mean, I
mhm,
don't know, maybe it's also about the Pisces Mercury, right? It's like, I have this big idea, it's just like what I want, right? But then it's like, yeah, that point of like knowing that, like knowing your space of like, no, like your point of view is, or like your point of view is already original in itself. And so
Mhm.
how can you kind of just like, you know, ease into it rather than
Yeah.
like focusing so much. And I think ease is such a Venusian thing, right?
Mhm.
Like the ease of life is such a,
Mhm.
how can I radicalize my ways of like easing into things, right? So that I feel natural, like so I feel like very authentic again, to
Mhm.
that. Um, but also like trying to also like know that with time, with time, I like Saturn, I also achieve whatever that point of like authenticity or like originality is for me.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
I
So
think what you are pointing out to Shahir is something
mhm,
important because um and I wasn't really planning to talk about this, but I think, when we think about originality, it really comes from a certain frequency, right?
mhm,
Originality is about an energetic signature. To me, it goes back to the idea of the life force and
mhm,
how our life force is truly unique, right?
mhm,
Similar to, I've been thinking again about this in relation to something sonic, which is our voice, right?
mhm.
Your voice is unique and your voice only exists in your human casing here in the
Yeah,
whole universe. I mean, think about that. That to
that's
me is an
true.
insane concept that
Mhm,
literally our voices right now are unique, right? And so uniqueness or originality is actually inherent, and it
mm,
is about it's not about doing things differently than other people, but I think it is about filling yourself up and filling your offering up with so much of your life force
mhm.
that in doing so, you are really kind of making so much space for who you are, your perspective to pulsate in the most vibrant frequency that it can vibrate in the world, right?
Yeah,
And to create and affect change in that way. Mhm.
yeah, no, I love that. And now I'm just like, I can't help to astrologize and how you're like relating to that, right? I was just like, yes, your Venus is in the bounce of Mercury, and the fact that you're talking about the voice, and I was like, that that is very beautiful. And your Mercury is also in the bounce of Venus. So it's like, you
Mm,
know,
mhm.
I think Mercury in the bounce of Venus is so good for musicians usually, because it's like I also have a Pisces Mercury in the bounce of Venus, and I've been pulling that energy in even more, right? Of just like,
Mm.
oh yeah, I do. I'm not saying that I have like the best voice to dance, which is kind of funny. Saying I'm going to a karaoke tonight with my friend's birthday.
I love
Very,
that.
very full moon moment. Yeah, she's a Capricorn. Yeah, so her birthday is a while ago, but um, and so yeah, I do feel like Venus in the bounce of Mercury has an appreciation for um like tiny little things, and perhaps those tiny little things are actually voice. Voice is like
Mhm,
part of those, like the force of life that you're talking about, and how
mhm.
does one kind of just like express oneself. And it's not just voice, it's like Mercury is all like, is the lord of the scribes, right? Anything that is written. So like
Yeah.
it's your Gemini moon too, obviously, but like I do, there's something about like Venus being in the bounce of Mercury for me. It's always like a person who's just like really appreciate thoughts, thoughts that
Mm.
are expressed and embodied, right? Because
Yeah.
Venus wants that. So it's like any sort of like even little messages means a lot to you.
Mm.
It's like do you feel, is that true? I'm just like trying to delineate your chart and kind of just like
Yeah,
interesting.
no. I think
Yeah.
that's extremely accurate, and thank you for that reflection, Shahir. It makes me
Yeah.
think about how, I think Venus in Aquarius is also able to um sense into kind of nonverbal communication and energy
Yeah.
that's being sent out, and is always in some ways, I think Venus in Aquarius is always receiving that or able to perceive that. And of course, then there are two kinds of responses that are available here, right? Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
two among many kinds of responses, one being to completely be overwhelmed by it all and just like start shutting down, and the
Mm-hmm.
other is to be able to navigate with a lot of skill all
Mm-hmm.
these different strands that you're picking up, right? And I think the image that I'm kind of getting is someone operating like a spaceship, right?
Mm.
Like being able to navigate like through different coordinates, like through
Mm-hmm.
infinite vastness of the universe, like this
Mm-hmm.
huge spaceship, but also that, you know, in the grander scheme of the universe, that spaceship is tiny, right?
Yeah, it
And
is
like
tiny.
that awareness of that bigness and the smallness of the hardware, I think is very much Venus and Aquarius. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for naming
no.
that. Hmm.
Yeah, it is. It is like the appreciation for the something small, but then it can also have a very big impact in some ways if you choose to kind of just like really, really trust the small voices, right? And I think it's
Totally.
like it's also very Saturnian in a way that's just like I actually have a lot of spirit in Aquarius, so it's like anyone's listening out there. That's why I was just like I do feel my soul has like a lot of spirit is a tradition. You know what? You know a lot of spirit, right?
Hmm.
it is related to the spirit to the soul. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I do feel like part of it is also like I love what you're saying about nonverbal sort of communication as well. Because sometimes I do feel Aquarian or even Venus and Aquarius there is a thing about like a certain sense of knowing, or perhaps that's also where intuition sort of reside in a way of just like, oh yeah, that's like that's not it, but like that's also it. It's like there's a sense of like
Mhm.
mm, tapping into this sort of like just like you see something and immediately you probably have an answer, you know?
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
think that they're also
Exactly.
like it's such a very it's a very like it's very vibrational. It's like, yeah, that's how when people say like, I vibe with that. Like, what do you mean when you vibe with something? It just means that like once I see something, I can just like relate to the frequency of it, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
it's like everyone have different frequencies, obviously. Um, and yeah, so it makes me think about that. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, of like relating to the frequencies of knowing.
Hmm.
Yeah, because there are sometimes like I talk astrology to people, like I can feel sometimes too that like, oh, like we're not on the same frequency here, but that's okay too.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this happens actually quite a bit, I think, in sessions because
Mm-hmm,
sometimes you are delineating something and maybe you have a particular agenda, but then
mm-hmm,
the moment, right, or the negative space between you and this person
mm-hmm.
is bringing something else up. And I always love those moments because it's a moment of humility for me. I always see
Yes.
that, those are the moments where there's evidence, especially when your intention is to help another person, to assist, to reflect to another person back their own power.
Mm-hmm,
I think it's powerful to think that it's not just my agenda that matters. It's not just what I mean that matters or what I want to convey, but
mm-hmm,
that there are spirits that are helping this person move
mm-hmm.
along in their journey. Hmm.
No, I think that is very fair. And I think that's also kind of just like doing that bridge work of like, that towards like the Aquarian as like the Capricorn between Capricorn and Pisces, right? It's like, yeah, you also need to know that negative. I love what you're saying about the negative states because it's like, yeah, it is
Mm.
like you sometimes, I do sometimes. Oh, coming into a reading, I was like, I want to talk about this. Like I see this, and I was like, but then sometimes it can end up being the negative side of Aquarian where you just don't vibe and it becomes like a
Hmm.
Saturnian thing where you're just like there's a literal wall from you and this other person,
Hmm.
but then because you create that wall just because you're so fixed, you're so fixed in your
Hmm.
own way. But then however, if you actually say that, oh, actually you're able to tune back, you're like, okay, am I actually like doing this thing, it's like also about the tuning in with the frequencies of like the client sort of way. I relate to that so much. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to really trust the, divine
Mm-hmm.
emergent redirection or
Mm-hmm.
renavigation, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, like when you have all these amazing things that you want to share with someone in sessions, it's often in some ways tied to the ego, which again, it's not to be vilified, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it may not be what is called for in that moment. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's also very, that like the Saturnian in a way, which is like knowing our limits, like I do think
Yeah.
it's like, knowing our limits and also knowing that what's the word I was looking for? It has to do with okay, I think I lost it. But yeah, I do feel like there's something about like the limits and um knowing, okay, yeah, it is also like, sometimes Aquarian people always say like it's related to a very humanity, right? It's also like, yeah, that's also how you arrive at a person's humanity and a person's limitation in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and coming to it with a point of compassion. Obviously, like Venusian is always wanting to relate, like is a Venus principle to like, hey, I want to relate with you. And so I think actually limits, like when we actually confront with a limit, that's like actually also where we know that we're not alone, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
I just have recent conversation with a friend where I was just like, girl, you're in a totally different space now, but we're actually confronting almost similar limits in life, you know? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I feel that, like, limitation is also a point of relation. It's like a pathway towards relationships. Especially right now. Like, I think Saturn has just been domiciled for too long, which is why I'm here for the Jupiter agenda.
Yes, me too.
I was like tweeting that recently. I was like, I am bored. Like I think it was Mo was just like, yeah, I am bored. And I was like, yeah, agree. Just like it's like praise Saturn, but yes, that was part of it. Um, I love how this conversation is flowing. And I
Me
love how
too.
you were talking about, so like your Venus is so fresh and such a, for me, whenever like a planet just freshly enters a sign, usually
Mm.
whenever a client comes in, yeah, it's like that's also like part of the storytelling of the chart, in the sense of that is like the fresh energy in your chart that you're meant to become and be
Mm-hmm.
almost, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so and yeah, like by whole sign, your Venus is really like, yeah, it is actually in aversion. And I kind of just like, I've been actually, it's kind of bizarre how many people I've seen in my client work, and even through this series, how I probably gonna have a workshop or even a lecture on this, or I'm probably gonna start doing a research
Go
consultation,
for it.
whatever.
That
Um,
sounds amazing.
because I've been really tuning in into the averse houses, very
Mm.
much on the lowdown, and I do feel there is something there. There is like my theory is always like, I call averse planets as like, when I say averse planets, it's like a planets that doesn't see their domicile ruler, right?
Mm.
Um, so I call them lost planets. Lost because um lost as in they have no role model, lost as
Mm.
in they can't find a the idea of domicile is like the leader, almost like, the one that you answer to, right? There's no
Mm.
steward that is governing that. But then it's not that there's no steward. The steward is just not there, right? It's like the host is just not there. You're just like, I am a guest here, but like, where is the owner of this place? Kind of energy. Hence, I do feel those planets need to learn a bit more, or even part of the life embodiment is to actually really make it your own space. It's like you're going to a territory where there's like, it's almost like you're going to a territory where the owner is hidden or it's not there. Then you have to make it your home, right? You have to just,
Mm.
you have to answer to yourself almost. So it's like
Yeah.
there's something about your Venus that is just like very much having that full autonomy of answering to herself. Um,
Mm.
and less
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, obviously, from the perspective of your sixth house Venus, it is answering to a fifth house Saturn, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like a neighbor, right? Just like a neighbor house, but like it's still, for me, it's still an averse house. Hence, I do feel like the Venus has to navigate the Venusian story, have to navigate the sixth house story, whatever it is, the
Mm.
Aquarian story, with a sense of sureness of who they are and what they're embodying. And
Mm.
Venus is also what they are valuing
Yeah.
in that end. So yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you
That
cannot
makes
like
so much sense.
I feel like lost planets, they like I mean I'm just like, creating a term here. I do feel like
Go for
lost
it.
planets can never be satisfied by their seeking, because there would be no one there will approve you, in the sense of like, it's like I do
Mm-hmm.
feel like lost planets is always waiting for a sense of approval from another person. But like, even if you get it, it won't be satisfactory. I'm sorry.
100%, 100%,
Because
Shahir.
you need to cultivate, like it's almost like a full ownership or a full authorship from within.
Mm.
And so that's my spiel.
You have to
That
write your own story. Yeah, that's
yeah,
brilliant. I love that.
yeah.
Hmm.
So because I've been thinking a lot of if like with my Mercury, I've been thinking a lot because my Mercury is in a verse to my Libra Jupiter. I've been thinking a lot about my Mars being averse to my Gemini moon. I have a Cancer Mars. So I was just like, oh wow. And I was kind of just like I was talking to a few clients and I just felt like that feels very true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I
So
agree.
you also have that signature sort of because that Venus in Aquarius is kind of just like alone there. You know, like not say
Hmm.
alone, but like there is a sense of like loneliness. And again, it's also Saturn house, right? You know, Saturn is also the sign that like requires solitude, but then but at the same time don't subscribe to loneliness, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Totally,
yeah.
totally. That's
You
such a
have
good point, Shahir.
yeah, what do you have to
Yeah,
say?
I guess here's what I will offer in terms of reflection. It is
Mm-hmm.
very fascinating to me that, my Mercury is fallen in a detriment, but it's
Mm-hmm.
somehow, in many ways, I think having a much easier time
Mm-hmm.
than Venus for a lot of my life because
Mm-hmm.
my Mercury is able to see its ruler,
Jupiter. Yeah.
Jupiter. Yeah, and
So
it has
juicy.
this.
That is so juicy. That's such a
I
juicy.
know, I know. It's like as long as you find the right teacher, you're good to go, right?
Yeah.
But my Venus, you're right. I think there's a lot of my Venus has had to kind of f- chart its own territory, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And where I am right now with that is, in really consciously taking pride in what that Venus has helped me accomplish. Like to not take it for
Mm-hmm.
granted, to really give my Venus a space to um like to just pat themselves on the back and be like,
Yes.
did you see what you fucking did here? And
Yeah.
just be okay with that. Like, it doesn't have to then lead to, how do we make this even better? Which I think my Venus and
Mm.
Aquarius really likes to do, right? It does have an awareness of like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
But just to kind of give give itself a lot of permission for being proud of what is accomplished so far has
Mm-hmm.
been really nourishing. Mhm.
No, that is fair, and I agree. I agree so much, and it's like it is a part. It is also like you know taking stock of time and kind of just like, hey, I am here. And so I need to like really acknowledge whatever genius is that I have to kind of just like implement it, right?
Yeah.
And that's also like because I do feel like, I feel like this is also another theory of time. I feel like Aquarian are um actually always looking ahead in a way, right? It's just like
Mm,
it's a very
mm,
like a sort of visionary or sort of like in terms of like, okay, what is the next thing I want to create? But the like Capricorn is always like, what are the things I want to leave behind? And so sometimes
mhm,
it's like sometimes that Venusian awareness of like, all right, I'm looking back and I was like, oh well, I've did this, I've done that. I'm so proud of myself. And like really just like being in that fixed presence, I would call it like a fixed presence of like time track and yeah and able to receive it and able
mhm.
to relate and enjoy life
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Oh my god, I love this conversation. Is there anything else that you um coming up for you in terms of your chart? I mean, I was just like looking at your houses, like your Taurus houses is in the ninth, and that is the house that is related to astrology and embodiment, and we
Mhm,
already touched about. I mean, you don't have any planets in Taurus, but then
mhm.
I mean, this year, last year, eclipse are having moment there, and the fact that you are also a podcaster, you share your thoughts on the
Mhm,
healing the spirit podcast, right? I felt that very
mhm,
much. I felt that's like very much the eclipse energy that is also
mhm.
like transiting your ninth and the
Totally.
third for sure. And the second, like
Jupiter
you
and
have,
Pisces too,
I
actually,
know
for
Jupiter
that
Pisces.
podcast.
That's
Yeah.
true. Like all the people coming up in the seventh. I mean, you do have a very, Mercury and Sun in the seventh, so that's
Mhm.
very juicy. Um, and I was also thinking, like, yeah, the second house, like Venus actually rules your second house too. It's like, and
Mhm.
I love how, like, that is a house of like personal resourcing, and I love how you were talking about, that sense of like the inner sort of like confidence, and how you are almost using the systems or even using astrology to actually build the kind of like, or even not build necessarily, like also almost like curate it, right?
Mhm.
Almost like curate the story that you kind of just like want to go towards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. I've
yeah.
been thinking a lot actually about that connection between Aquarius being in the sixth house and then
Mm-hmm.
or Venus being in the sixth house and then kind of ruling both the second house and the ninth
Mm-hmm.
house. And I think with regards to the ninth house, you're right. That area of my chart has been really activated,
Mm-hmm.
definitely with the North Node, definitely with Uranus. And um, I think it's been very literal for me. Like I literally learned astrology or started taking my astrology studies very seriously during that transit.
Mm,
I really started embracing becoming a teacher. And I don't mean becoming a teacher in terms of role or function, because yes, that is also something I've been embracing.
mm-hmm.
But I think what's been more important is to say yes to the archetype of the teacher that is within me.
Oh,
And in so
beautiful.
doing, kind of coming into right relationship with my inner student and inner seeker, which is, by the way, extremely alive for me, extremely comfortable for me. You probably noticed too as a Gemini moon. Like, I
Yeah.
love being, the fool, right? Like, I love being the one who is always seeking and always learning new
Yeah.
things. And finding a space for myself where I can do both of that at the same time, where
Mm-hmm.
I'm in this really interesting space of like, I have a lot to share, but I also have a lot to learn. And how do I balance
Mm,
the two, right? And how do I really prioritize the pleasure in the pursuit of knowledge in that process, like,
mm,
and I think that behind all of that, Shahir, especially with regards to my Taurus ninth house, what has been the most important part of the story is around healing my relationship to my voice.
mm,
Because a lot of my fear around sharing my perspective, sharing my voice, literal voice and metaphorical voice, has to do with a lot of stuckness I feel in that area of life.
mm-hmm.
Recently I was doing a voice workshop, as in like a singing workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And what was interesting was, the instructor showed us the kind of the what do you call it? It's like it's not X-ray, but it's kind of they put like this camera through like
Mm-hmm.
someone's um like vocal tract to
Mm-hmm.
see what the vocal cords look like. And it's crazy because we know from medical astrology that Taurus rules the throat, right?
Yeah.
And there's a very interesting, if you just Google what vocal cords look like, it
Mm-hmm.
basically looks the same as the vulva.
Oh my God. I love
So I
that.
think like healing shame around my voice and
Mm-hmm.
how my voice is so connected to my pelvis and kind of the sacral way of being that I am, which
Mm-hmm.
also relates to me being a generator,
Mm-hmm.
has been huge for me. And I think, yes, that's really impacted my second house. But I also do see, I think Venus is very interesting in that Libra and Taurus have very different vibes to me, at
Mm-hmm.
least.
Yeah.
Like Libra is much more about relationships. Libra is much more about the non-tangible.
Mm-hmm.
And I really see my Libra second house in a few things. One is I see it in how I love collaborating with different people. And
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned, I have a podcast where I basically interview people. So
Yeah,
that's
which I will be
constantly
on,
being
which
in
is
call. Yes, I'm so excited. I can't wait to have our conversation.
I know.
Um, and the enjoyment of collaboration,
Mm-hmm.
the fraughtness or kind of the difficulty, the challenge that comes with having to navigate your desire or navigate your space, navigate your agenda and your thoughts with another person, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
always like a challenge that I'm like ready to take on. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that has to do with my sun in seventh house too. But I think I really see this in terms of my second house Libra as, yes, I am working in groups, in terms of how to
Yeah.
resource myself and resource other people. And also I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a certain ephemerality. We've been talking about the corporality of like Venus,
Mm-hmm.
but I think with regards to Venus and how it shows up in Libra, there's also something about, really trusting in the beauty of that which is not always tangible, right?
Yeah.
But can be tangibly felt. Like when you think
Mm-hmm.
about things like music or things like art, it doesn't have to be
Poetry.
tangible.
Yeah.
Poetry, right? It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be something you can touch in order
Mm-hmm.
for it to be something you can feel. So I think
Yeah.
that also has been, yeah, kind of a huge part of my story too.
Oh my God. I love that. That is such a beautiful way to to summarize it even. And wow. I love that. I love the way that you view it as a your chart here. But yeah, and Venus in the sixth. So it's like for me, it's like, Venus in the sixth feels like in service to love, right? I'm a love
Mm,
devotee, like sixth house is the house of service. I mean, there's a lot of bad connotation with the sixth house if you go to the traditional sort of framework of things, like that is a house of labor, that is a house of
yeah.
servitude. Um,
Mhm,
but then I always love to say it's like, yeah, but that's also like the house of what am I in service to? Why do I
mhm,
feel that sixth house, it is can sometimes feel a bit underappreciated, right? It is like a
mhm,
voice that is I can feel like, and then we can go down that line of feeling underappreciated with like the systems, why this isn't doesn't value this, blah blah blah. But then I do feel like there's something with the sixth and the 12th house, which is very much related to like altruism in a way, or very much related to like what is actually the bigger purpose? Like, what do I have as a role in my being that I can
mhm.
offer? It is still a benefic for me. It is like
Yeah.
benefic is gonna benefic. And sometimes weirdly, it is, I mean, Venus is also your like out of sec benefic. So
Mhm.
sometimes Venus can feel a bit like, oh wow, like Venus, but you do that, right? Um
Totally.
it can also point to like certain extremes, right? But however, I do feel like there's something with the sixth house, especially being in a sixth house year. I'm in a sixth house year right now,
Oh
so I'm
yeah.
like I feel there is always a sense of like, like this work might feel underappreciated, but like no, they are actually like, and rather than focusing on the people who are not appreciating it, there's almost always almost like a what's the word a conscious process
Mm,
of trying to look back to the people I am appreciating of my work. There's always that sense
mm,
of like I do feel like planets in the sixth house always have to kind of like do this kind of like weird like turning, like because you can't see the other person like the seventh house is. It's almost like you
mm,
have to use your other senses to like other means of like witnessing um your achievement or like your impact or your ways of relating or whatever, and how people have valued that, and I
mm.
think that's a very important sixth house sort of like work.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
brilliant, Shahir. I love that.
yeah.
I will also add, I think one way I've been looking at the sixth house is, in terms of derivative houses, the sixth house
Mm-hmm.
is the second house to the fifth house, right? And everybody loves the fifth
Mm.
house, right? Like the fifth house is where Venus fucking rejoices, like everybody
That's
loves
me.
their fifth house.
Aries Venus.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah, so
It's gorgeous. It's
second house,
gorgeous.
yeah. Okay, so
And I think
anyways.
thinking about like the second house, the
Mm-hmm.
sixth house being the second house to the fifth house, right, is kind
Mm-hmm.
of making me think about the book that Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a few years ago, Big Magic, where, yes, she was talking about liberating your creativity, like letting the inner critic sit in the back seat, right? But also something in that book that feels very like Venus ruled by Saturn to me
Mm-hmm.
is that somewhere in there she was also talking about, you know, if you don't have a structure around how to let your creativity flow, right? Like for me, for example, in my music, musician example, if I don't make time to sit there and do nothing except write music or toy around with my music software, if I don't have my microphone set up, right? If I don't create the necessary space and time in my life to support the birthing
Mm-hmm.
of and not just the birthing, but like the continued livelihood, of my
Mm-hmm.
creativity, it's
Mm-hmm.
just not going to happen, kids. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think, there's something that Elizabeth Gilbert was also saying too, that, she said, I told Spirit basically that I don't care if I become a famous writer or not. That is not my job. My job
Mm-hmm.
is to show up, because what I really want to do in this life is to be in a praxis of writing, right? Essentially, to
Mm.
paraphrase, that's what she
Yeah.
said. And I think it's really beautiful to think about the sixth house as like that place where we tap into enough humility to be able to support our fifth house creative
Mm-hmm.
and unique and authentic self-expression.
Oh my God, that is beautiful. I love that. I love that because especially as a person who is in a Venus year, who actually have a fifth house Venus, and then feeling into the energy of like what you're saying, right? Of like
Mm,
making space, making time, you know. I mean, that's
mhm,
why I signed up for like Sabrina's like meteorite, and I was like, yes, this is a project I want to do.
mm,
And creating space and time, reaching out to people. Um, and yeah, I agree. I agree 100% with what you're saying. Um and it is a house of toil, and it is a house of like that has to do with Mars. It's like, it is the
mm,
place of Mars in a it is the rejoicing place of Mars. So it's like you have like your Venus and Mars are switched, it's like your Mars is in the place of Venus, which is the house of good fortune, and then sixth
totally.
house, and so you have that flip configuration. And then yeah, I do feel like sixth house has a lot to do with that, of just like I need to actually create space, right? I need to actually do something
Mhm,
with it if it's something
mhm.
that I actually truly value, right? If I actually value
Yes.
something, I'll make time for it. I think that's
Mhm,
almost like a, sometimes I go that with friendships too, which is like, it's like, yeah, I will like make time for things that I love. Um, and
mhm,
that and it can feel a bit difficult, or like can feel sometimes that's like um that like you actually you're not sure, sometimes you're not even sure what you're going to get back, right? It's like, oh
yeah.
yeah, you're just making time for it, but then things will come whenever you make time
Mm.
for it. So
Ah,
yeah.
I love that, Jules, so much. Thank you. Yes. I'm also,
Oh,
by the way, not
uh-huh.
to, this is my Venus and Aquarius disclaimer. It's not like I've mastered that art,
No,
but like
obviously
I
we're all
really,
living.
exactly, we're all living, and I really love what you're saying there, because it feels very much like the space where I'm at right now is about
Hmm.
making time for those things that really matter to me. And,
Mm.
consequently, you have to say no to the things that maybe is like a half yes for you, which
Hmm.
can sometimes be really painful, because, those half yeses can also, include people that you really care about and people that you really
Mm.
love. But sometimes you
Hmm.
just have to say no because you need more space in your life. So,
No,
yeah.
agree.
Mhm.
I agree because it's like that's a way of you showing up and a way for you being true. And I think it comes back to the point of like authenticity and coming
Yeah.
back to like yeah, being a person.
Mhm.
Okay, that feels very complete. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for
Yeah.
sharing and exchanging. I feel like that is such a I'm gonna like what's interesting is just like I've been like seeing the series, and like I can feel almost like the Venus energy is like very present in every
Mm,
single configurations of this.
mhm.
Venus is like obviously I'm interfacing with different people. They're telling different story. I was also at a very different time. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's gonna be exciting when I'm able to like synthesize this and do some sort of like presentation
Uh,
afterwards. Yeah.
I love that. I can't wait to see it. I feel like you're kind of growing alongside Venus. And I was watching some of
Yeah.
the other interviews you did last night, and
Mm-hmm.
I think you're creating a very special space here where, people can just chat with you, and you're such a
Mm-hmm.
good space holder, and your energy and your laughter is totally infectious, Shahir. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Venus. Thanks, Venus, and all the planets for holding this space, sacred space
Mm.
for us to commune and to talk. If you're listening it to this in whatever time in the future, check out other videos too. And I hope your whoever's Venus in Aquarius out there, they feel witnessed in some ways and feel
Mm-hmm.
that, oh yes, that's me. That's actually my true purpose of this, um or one of my purpose of whoever is watching this. So yeah, or
Oh, I
even
love
a
that.
way, yeah, or even also a ways of acknowledging, like for me, my intention was simple. It was like I was like, I want people to feel seen and celebrated for their Venus, and also able to perhaps relate to whoever is around. And I was like, oh, no wonder,
Mm-hmm.
no wonder they love this way, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you have to know, like again, you have to know the manual, the rule book, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
for
really
us to.
feel like,
Mhm.
yeah, something's coming through for me here, and I kind of want to say it before we end,
Yes, go ahead.
because there was a dream that, or a vision that I kind of was in touch with maybe sometime last week or so, that feels very Venus and Aquarius to me. And maybe,
Mhm.
this is going to be my last piece of,
No, go
this
ahead.
is the hill I'm going to die on, which
Go
is,
ahead.
this vision was, I was in a long table, kind of like if you think about, the old medieval, um, Arthur's like feast table, right? Like I was
Mhm.
in that table, I was surrounded by friends, everybody was laughing so like boisterously, and like there was nobody was holding back.
Mhm.
And I was really feeling into what about that dream, what about that vision really resonated with me. And I think, part of the Venus in Aquarius desire is in creating a world where everybody is empowered to just be themselves, and everybody is
Mm.
empowered to witness another person in their full glory and in their full access of their inherent power, in their inherent worthiness and belonging, and for the Venus and Aquarius to not ever have to shrink themselves back into a
Mm.
tiny little thing again, right? So this is kind of also giving me like, band of superheroes vibes. Like if you think
Mhm.
about X-Men, for example, like that to
I
me is
love
very much
X-Men.
me too. That feels very much to me like Venus and Aquarius. And I think that, really contemplating and sitting down, and feeling into like what is necessary for me to really create this dream in my life, and what do I need to release, what do I need to let go of, and what do I need to embrace more of, and what do I need to cultivate, is I think the Venus and Aquarius, like what is the task, the task that is given to the Venus and Aquarius is in figuring that out, right? Is in feeling into like how can you realize this dream where everybody is empowered, and you don't have
Mm.
to shrink back anymore. And I think a lot of it actually starts with you just practicing not shrinking.
Mm. Oh my God. I love that because
Hmm.
wow, that is beautiful. Practice not shrinking yourself,
Hmm.
which is such a solid Saturnian gift. That is literally, Saturn is about contraction, and it's like Venus is, so it's like I do feel like the energy feels like, yeah, like you don't shrink yourself, like you should, like you
Mm.
contract, but then you contract to expand, right? It's like the
Yeah.
Saturn Jupiter principle as well. That is so rich. I love that, like that hack, like practice not shrinking yourself, and having everyone feeling empowered at the seat of the table, um, feels very much it for me.
Mm. Mm.
Oh my
Mm.
God. I
Thank you,
love ending on
Shahir.
that note. Thank you so much again, Jonathan. And thank you all the listeners for tuning in. Stay tuned, like, subscribe, because I'm planning to grow this page even more.
Yay.
So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.